So the United States Supreme Court is locked in a massive high-stakes emergency showdown that could alter nationwide rules overnight. The Supreme Court has just stepped in and froze a decision issued by the Fifth Circuit involving mail-order medications and what rights states have under that recent Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court. The state order issued by the Supreme Court opens back up a major political battle involving states' rights. In two consolidated cases, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals implemented a sweeping nationwide block and restriction on these types of medications. Recognizing the high stakes of that lower court ruling by the Fifth Circuit, the Supreme Court issued a major emergency stay order that freezes that lower court's ruling. But behind the emergency order is a deep division on the Supreme Court itself, actually an aggressive push by individual states, and a high-profile political issue that is making nationwide headlines. So we need to break down what happened in this emergency order, what is going on in this lawsuit, and what this split decision and order by the Supreme Court actually means for these types of constitutional issues going forward. Now, before we jump into what the Supreme Court just did with this emergency order, if you like this type of content and you want to make sure that you receive it, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications to make sure you never miss this information. Now, to understand why this emergency application and order that was issued by the Supreme Court is drawing such intense scrutiny and attention across the country, we have to look at the exact federal mechanisms and also issue at play in this case. This entire conflict exploded over regulations of a certain piece of medication that was ordered by mail and could actually be received by individuals, and it was widely used, this piece of medication, for abortions. Back in 2021 and 2023, the FDA officially removed this long-standing in-person dispensing requirements for the medication, enabling the medication to be prescribed via telehealth, filled out by local retail pharmacies, and delivered straight to individuals' doors. However, the state of Louisiana, which enforces a strict ban on abortion within its borders, filed a federal lawsuit under the Administrative Procedures Act, also known as the APA. Louisiana argued that the FDA's mail-in order rules are completely arbitrary and capricious, claiming that out-of-state telehealth orders are directly undermining the state's sovereign powers to regulate within its own borders. Now, the legal question isn't just about this healthcare issue or this whole telehealth mail-in order issue. It's a constitutional battle over federal preemption as well. And the question is, can a state use the administrative lawsuits here to force a federal agency like the FDA to undo a nationwide distribution rule? Now, the friction reached kind of a boiling point when a federal district court initially paused the case. Now, dissatisfied with that pause on the case, Louisiana bypassed it and went directly to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on appeal, demanding an emergency order which would block the FDA's current mail-in order rule. In a very quick ruling, a 3-judge panel in the Fifth Circuit sided with the state of Louisiana, granting a sweeping injunction that completely rolled back the FDA's telehealth and mail-in order rules nationwide, essentially attempting to instantly reinstate an in-person dispensing mandate across all 50 states. Now, in this case, there were 2 drug manufacturers that immediately rushed to the Supreme Court, filed for emergency review, and warned that abruptly halting a multi-year distribution framework would unleash some unprecedented chaos. So that is why they said the Supreme Court needed to step in on an emergency basis. Now, this is where the story gets interesting because Justice Samuel Alito originally issued a temporary short-term administrative stay to give the Supreme Court full time to review the briefs in this case. But when the full court officially voted to grant the formal stay pending appeal, the bench actually fractured. There was 2 dissenting judges in this order. You had Justice Samuel Alito and then Justice Clarence Thomas, both fiercely dissenting from the decision to issue the stay on that Fifth Circuit ruling. Now, in his dissent, Justice Alito slammed the majority, arguing that the drug manufacturers here shouldn't get a pass on state regulations based on lost profits. This reveals that the highest court in the land is fundamentally split on how to handle these sweeping administrative overrides. Now, for everyone watching this, you have to look past the specific pharmaceutical debate and expose the massive constitutional engine that is driving this entire conflict. This is a high-stakes sequel to the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Dobbs. When the Supreme Court overrode Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs ruling, they explicitly stated that the authority to regulate or restrict these types of issues was being returned to the people and their elective state representatives, so the power went back to the states. But that ruling opened up a massive, unprecedented kind of constitutional gray area that states like Louisiana are now trying to operate in. The legal question has now transformed from a debate over state laws into an all-out jurisdictional war between individual state borders and the federal government itself through agencies like the FDA and certain rules that they have in place. Louisiana is essentially arguing that under the spirit of Dobbs, their state level restrictions should allow them to block out-of-state entities from shipping items directly to their residents. This also brings in the issue of whether circuit courts like the Fifth Circuit can issue a ruling that impacts this issue nationwide and modify a current FDA rule. Furthermore, this also shows the speed and kind of chaos of the Supreme Court shadow docket, which this case went through. The fact that the nationwide commercial rules can be completely turned on and off over a single weekend via rapid fire kind of emergency stay orders by the Supreme Court shows how quickly the legal landscape on controversial topics like this can actually change. The Supreme Court may have temporarily frozen the lower court's order, so they blocked what the Fifth Circuit said, but this also revealed a deep split among the Supreme Court as well, because you had Thomas and Alito dissenting in that order. And the larger question really is what is going to happen when this goes, to the Fifth Circuit for full review, because they also sent this to the Fifth Circuit for full appellate review. And eventually this is also going to likely make its way back to the Supreme Court. And, the question is, what will they do on full review of this case? The Supreme Court's emergency stay has temporarily blocked the Fifth Circuit ruling and kept the mail order framework currently intact, at least for now. But this is just a strategic pause while the case heads back down to the Fifth Circuit for a full appellate review, and like I mentioned, likely will eventually make its way back to the Supreme Court for further review. The Supreme Court is fundamentally divided on this issue, and we're looking at a profound struggle over the outer limits of what the Supreme Court recently said in that Dobbs ruling, and what can states really do, and how does this interplay work when you have federal rules through the FDA about these types of medications being mail order, and what type of rights do states have to block those types of federal rules. So that is the high stakes reality behind the Supreme Court's recent emergency docket showdown and that emergency order that was issued that is currently developing. It's going to go back to the Fifth Circuit, but like I said, it will likely make its way back to the Supreme Court. The stay is currently in place by the Supreme Court, but with Alito and Thomas dissenting, the wider battle over federal control is likely far from over. So I'm going to be tracking this as it develops through the Fifth Circuit and likely makes its way back to the Supreme Court. Again, it's one of those cases that tries to expand upon Dobbs and is kind of showing the impact of Dobbs and how it's playing out with certain states putting restrictions on these items. So as this develops more, as we get more information, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you want to support the channel and make sure you get updates on this type of content, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and turn on all notifications to make sure you get these types of videos when I release them. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.